Hi, this is Veronica Nye, Senior Economist at TFI. Thanks for tuning in today. We're going to continue our nutrient series that we started back in 2024. When we first started, we talked about ammonia, which is one of the most common nitrogen fertilizers. Then we talked about DAP, diammonium phosphate, which is one of the more common phosphate fertilizers. And today we want to talk about potash, which is a commonly used word to describe potassium fertilizers. So like nitrogen and phosphorus, potassium is an essential plant macronutrient that plants take up in large quantities. While potassium is naturally occurring in soils, harvesting crops removes potassium from the soil. So, obviously the quantity that is removed depends on the plant, depends on the soil, depends on the amount of biomass that is harvested from that crop. So plants that have adequate potassium are better able to withstand stress, insect damage, and plant diseases compared to plants that are low in potassium. So enter potassium fertilizers, which are commonly used to overcome plant deficiencies. Potash is a general term used to describe a large variety of potassium-containing fertilizers in agriculture, but the most commonly used potassium fertilizer is potassium chloride, which is also referred to as muriate of potash or MOP. But typically when people say potash, potassium chloride is what they're referring to. And that's because it's a relatively inexpensive source of potassium. It includes more potassium than most other sources. So MOP typically includes 50 to 52% potassium. Over 90% of global potash product is used for plant nutrition. So this is clearly a product very critical to agriculture. Potassium deposits are found throughout the world, but concentrated in a few places, and we'll talk about that more here in a minute. But most potassium minerals are harvested from ancient marine deposits deep beneath the Earth's surface. They're then transported to a processing facility where it's crushed, and the potassium salts are separated from the sodium salts. As I mentioned, large reserves of potash are concentrated in a few places. For example, 2/3 of global production of potash occurs in just 3 countries. About 1/3 of global production of potash occurs in Canada, about 20% occurs in Russia, and about 15% occurs in Belarus. While there are deposits of potash in the United States, U.S. production of potash is less than half of 1% of global potash production. That means that the U.S. is very dependent on imports from other countries in order to satisfy our potash needs. To put a finer point on that, 98% of U.S. potash consumption is derived from imports, and 87% of those imports come from Canada, with the remaining coming from Russia. That means when you combine all those numbers, that 85% of U.S. potash needs come from Canada. So clearly, potash is a product that the U.S. is very dependent on international trade, and that those trade partners are essential to making sure that U.S. production can be all that it can be. So next time we talk about a product, we'll probably go back to the nitrogen space. Maybe we'll talk about urea. There's been some really interesting things happening in that space in the last several years. But again, thanks for joining me today for this quick discussion about potash.